I hope that means that you can hear me okay. Let me know if there's any sound issues. Um, Hello to Mexico. Lovely. I guess you're here and you can hear me. So lovely. Do say hello in the chat box. Let me know where you're joining from because I love to see where you are in the world. Oh, I'm glad the sound is perfect. Let's hope it stays that way for the whole webinar. Okay, thank you very much for joining me today. I will start this webinar, as always. If you've joined the previous webinars in this series, you'll know this information very well, but I'll start with a little bit of housekeeping. You will get a certificate of attendance. We will send that to you via email within a week. Keep an eye on your spam box as well as your inbox, just in case it disappears into the spam box. And with that email, you'll get, as I said, the certificate of attendance. You'll also get a link to a recording of this webinar and a handout as well. So that will come to you. You don't need to email Pearson. We have your email from when you signed up. Lovely to see you saying there in the chat box. Question there from Claudia. I'm about to answer that actually. This is the fifth webinar in this series on assessment for learning. This is the final webinar. You can watch the previous webinars on Pearson's YouTube channel. So if you didn't manage to join them live, you can still watch them by going onto YouTube and searching for Pearson. And at the end of this webinar, I will also share a link to those recordings and also to some assessment for learning resources as well. If you didn't watch those webinars, then I do recommend you go back and watch them. As I said, this is the final webinar, the fifth webinar. Those earlier webinars give you a really good understanding of the principles behind assessment for learning, some of the research, why it works, why it's successful, and then lots and lots of strategies. So if you didn't watch it, then please go back and have a look at it. Yes, Melissa, I'll be sharing the link to the other webinars at the end of this one, or you can go onto YouTube and Pearson's YouTube channel and you'll find all the webinars there. Okay, if you don't know me, if you didn't join those webinars, I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Amanda Davies and I'm a teacher trainer, a writer and an editor, and I specialise in young learners. So I work with primary and secondary students and their teachers. And if you did join my previous webinars, you'll probably have realised that I'm a really big fan of assessment for learning. I've been using it for a number of years and there are so many benefits for students and teachers. The main one being that the strategies help students to get better at learning. And when our students are better at learning, it means the teacher's time is freed up to do more teaching. There's less time spent on classroom management, on motivating students, on getting them to do what you want them to do, because the students are more motivated to learn. So yeah, motivated students make teaching much more satisfying, much more enjoyable. Now in the previous webinar, in the fourth webinar in this series, we looked at peer learning, and today the topic is independent learning. And these two webinars, or these two themes, are very much connected. When we talk about independent learning, we don't mean students learning alone. There are not many learning situations. In fact, I can't think of any situations where you're forced to learn something entirely without resources. There's always the internet or a friend or a family member. There's always someone who you can ask. Being completely alone really describes a testing situation, which isn't what assessment for learning is all about. Assessment for learning is about learning. So we're going to look at a few things in this webinar. Here's what's coming up. First of all, we're going to think about what exactly independent learning is. If it's not students learning alone, then what is it? Then I'm going to share some strategies with you for the classroom. And then at the end, there'll be a little bit of time for questions. Feel free to ask me questions in the chat box as we go through the webinar. I might miss them because I'm not always the best at talking and reading. So if I miss your question, save it up and ask me again at the end, or keep asking it. Okay, so lovely. Hello to everyone in the chat box. I wish I could say hello to you all individually, but hello. There's a couple of questions there. You'll get a handout from this webinar along with your certificate of attendance. Nesta, if you can't hear me, I suggest logging out and logging back in again. I'm not sure what else to try. Okay, so let's get started with the webinar. And first of all, we're going to think about what is independent learning. Can you let me know in the chat box what it means to you? What is independent learning in your classroom? Let me know in the chat box your thoughts. Yeah, group work. So being independent can be working and using other students. Being able to work at your own pace, I like that a lot, Patricia. Sometimes students can be rushed because we tend to go with the majority speed. Obtaining knowledge, yep. Yes, I like a couple of you mentioned time management or self-management, so managing the time that they spend on something. Responsibility is a very important work when it comes to independent learning. And doing their best to find solutions and just doing their best, trying hard, I think. Sometimes students give up before they've really tried. And Melissa, I like your idea as well about getting the answers by themselves. And strategies as well. We use this word strategies a lot, don't we? Okay. I agree with what you have been saying. And I think to make things really clear, I've got a definition for you, which I find really useful. So here's a definition of independent learning. Put simply, independent learning is when pupils set goals, monitor, and evaluate their own academic development so they can manage their own motivation towards learning. So it's not that students have to be learning on their own. What it means, or what independent learning means, is that there are aspects of their learning that students need to be more responsible for, because when they are responsible for these things, then their learning is more effective. The teacher is still there to teach them. That's our job. We can't escape it. We have to do, we have to earn our money and do our job of teaching. So the teacher is still there to support them, but we can't really, there's a lot we can do to motivate our students. But if the goals and the motivation comes from the students themselves, then their learning is much more effective. So we want students to take responsibility and be independent when it comes to their own progress and their goal setting. So actually everything that we've been looking at in this series of webinars, these whole series of 5 webinars, all the strategies really contribute to independent learning. But I've still got some new strategies to share today. But if you watch those webinars, you'll realize, a lot of these, the ideas today sort of fit into other categories that we've talked about. Because again, it's all about helping students to get better at learning. Some of the strategies I'm going to share today ask students to be a bit more reflective, and so ways to get them to really think about their progress and how far they're coming throughout the year, rather than just in a lesson, but strategies where they can map their progress throughout the year. And then I've also got some strategies that are maybe not strictly assessment for learning, but do encourage autonomy and independence in the classroom. So I hope there'll be some useful things for you to try today. I have to start when thinking about strategies for independence in the classroom. I have to mention again learning objectives and success criteria. And if you joined that webinar, that was the second webinar in this series, you'll know, well, you'll know how effective the research says these strategies are. Maybe you've tried them out. If you've tried learning objectives or success criteria since that webinar, let me know in the chat box now how it's been going. We don't have time to revise that today because it was a full 60-minute webinar just dedicated to these 2 strategies. So if you didn't watch that webinar, I highly recommend you go and watch it. And if you only do 2 things, if you only take 2 things away from these webinars, 2 strategies, then these are the ones to implement. They've worked and they continue to work very well in my classroom. They're a great routine. So do watch that webinar if you want your students to be more independent, then those are the strategies to go for. Have you tried them? Have you experimented at all with learning objectives or success criteria? Claudia, how has it gone? Any success stories? Okay, Michael, it's good that they've worked out for you with your students. Katerina, take a screenshot, but if you're here at the end of the webinar, I'll be sharing another link to a website where you can find all the webinars, but take a screenshot or take a quick photo. I don't think you can click on it directly. Okay, Maria, it's good to hear that they are working well for you. Elena, I'm happy that your students liked it. So there's a little bit of proof in the chat box there. If you haven't tried them out yet, then have a go, watch the webinar, and then try them out in your classroom. So 2 great strategies for encouraging independence. I wish we could revise them today, but we haven't got enough time because there's plenty of new things to talk about today. Okay, a very nice start of unit or start of project, start of topic routine is I see, I think, I wonder. And actually you can use this at the start of a lesson or an activity or any sequence of work. I like it because it's almost no prep, but it's a very nice routine. All it is, you start a new topic by introducing it with something that represents the topic, which is probably what you do anyway. So it could be a picture, a photo, a book cover, a video clip. It could be an object, but anything that represents the topic that you're going to be dealing with in the lesson or the next few lessons. And then you give the students 3 questions to think about. The first one is, what did you see? The second one is, what do you think about that? And the third one is, what do you wonder? Or you can give sentence stems to simplify it. So just I see, I think, I wonder. I would recommend giving students a little bit of time to think about the answers to the questions by themselves first, and then sharing their ideas with a partner. So using this technique of think, pair, share that we looked at in webinar 4. I really like these questions because it moves students from the lower order thinking skills, so just describing, and it moves them through to the higher order thinking skills where they're actually starting to formulate their own questions about the topic and start to think about the things that they want to learn. Let's have a go now. So here's a picture that I used recently to set the concept for the unit I was studying. So let me know in the chat box, have a look at the picture. What do you see in this picture? Let me know now in the chat box, what do you see? A donbra. I don't know if that's a technical term, but I like it a lot. So some zebra legs. Oh, some very creative responses there. Okay, is it a donkey? Is it a zebra? Maybe it's some sort of experiment. A horse with striped legs. A donkey with stripy legs. What do you think about that then? So the second question, let me know in the chat box. What do you think about this picture? It could be a donkey wearing socks. It could be some sort of unfair experiment. Yeah, that's true. It could be taken on a farm. It might be to do with carnival. Okay. What about the third question then? So what do you wonder about this picture? It could be paint, yeah. It could be paint. Maybe it's not real. Okay, so does it exist even? Can I take it home? Can it be my pet? Yeah, I wonder if it's photoshopped. Where is it? Who looks after it? Who thought of it? How fast does it run? Okay, so already you've generated a huge number of questions. My students generated similar questions, not quite as grammatically correct as yours. I can tell you're all teachers. So the students generated their own questions that they wanted to find out. So before we even started the unit of work, the students had things that they wanted to find out. So they were really motivated to get into the lesson and find out what's going on here. Actually, it doesn't matter if you have the answers to the questions because we are encouraging independence, and it might be that the students find out the answers in their own time, or maybe there's a little bit of lesson time dedicated to research. So you have probably planned your scheme of work. You might have a reading or a listening. You have materials, so you don't have to have the answers to the questions. As teachers, we don't have to know everything. We need to know about the language, that we want students to use, but we don't need to know the answers to every single question. But when students have their own questions, they work with much more motivation. Are they going to get the answers? What is the answer? It works really well with pictures, which is great because the course books we use usually have nice pictures, or it's very easy to bring up a picture online, print out a picture. Here's another picture I've used recently. So any picture that is a little bit ambiguous, a little bit mysterious or creative works really well. I love the idea that this donkey is wearing socks, and the thought of a donkey putting on socks is also lovely. So thank you, Diana, for that image. Young learners, primary and secondary learners respond really well to routines, and this is a really simple routine to get into. As I said already, it's very low preparation, and it moves students from lower order thinking skills to higher order thinking skills, and really gets them interested in the lessons. So it's worked for me. Try it out. I would love to hear how you get on with it in your classroom. Okay, that's quite a simple one. You can build it into lessons quite easily. Another strategy that works very well to encourage independence is learning diaries. I wonder if you've used learning diaries in the past or not. I avoided learning diaries, or I avoided finding out what they were for quite a long time, because I thought, or I assumed that they would take quite a lot of lesson time. I only see my students, each group, for 2 or 3 hours a week. And my presumption was, it takes too much time, I don't have time for it. But actually I was wrong. I've been using learning diaries with my students now for a couple of years. And I found them to be really effective in getting students to reflect not only on the lesson, but their longer term progress. So basically, a learning diary is a designated place where students can reflect on their learning. And the format is very much up to you and what works. So it could be the students have a special notebook that they use for their reflections. It could be a collection of handouts. It could be a page in the back of the students' normal notebooks, or in the back of their course book. So it's somewhere where they can reflect. A really useful aspect of learning diaries, it's a place where students can communicate directly with the teacher. Students, teenagers in particular, they often don't want to put their hand up and speak directly to the teacher. If they have a question or a problem, often they'll just keep it to themselves because they're shy, or they don't want to embarrass themselves, or they don't want to speak to the teacher during lessons. So a learning diary provides a nice way for students to communicate directly with the teacher. Ina says, you've used learning diaries, difficult to manage. I hope the way that I've been doing it and the way I'm going to share today will help you to manage it more easily. Learning diaries are great. They're a place where students can record their successes and challenges, which is great. And they can also record their future aims and goals. So that's what we want to put in a learning diary. So how do we do it? I will share what I do. I don't have much time to dedicate to learning diaries. So I do it maybe once a month. At the end of each month, I print out a handout. So my students don't have specific books, but we have a collection of handouts. I print a handout for each student that has some prompts or some questions or some things that they need to reflect on. And I vary this depending on what we've been learning about, how much time I've got, the level of the students, the age of the students, how mature they are. So there are a number of factors I take into consideration, but here is an example. I'm not sure that it's very clear. But here, this learning diary asks students to make a note of the topics they've been studying, new vocabulary, new grammar, and new skills. Now, of course, they don't have to write every single thing that has been introduced in lessons. When we're teaching vocabulary to students, some of it is new, some of it is revision for certain students. The same with grammar. Sometimes students will learn something very quickly, sometimes it's more challenging. So in the learning diary, they should focus on the things that were new for them. To do this, I do a quick brainstorm. I ask students to shout out the words we've been learning or the structures. I write them on the board, and then students can make a note of what was new or challenging for them. So I like to have a section that's about what they learnt. I also like to have something that reflects on something that they enjoyed or something, not so much about the language or the skills. So on the right, there's a box, and here I've got my biggest achievement and my favourite activity. So students can let the teacher know what activity they particularly enjoyed, which is great because then we know what to repeat. It's not always easy to tell with teenagers if they're enjoying something or not, because some they can be quite expressionless, let's say. There's a box at the bottom there where students can write about their goals, and then there's a space for students to ask a question to the teacher. Here's an alternative that I was using with primary students. So here it's just recording new words. They can draw a picture if they prefer, or they can write. Again, there's space for my favourite activity and my ideas for next month, which is nice. So students can let you know what they would like to work on. And this one's got a teacher comments box. And here's another one. This focuses on topics, my favourite lesson, and my teacher can help me by, they can say how the teacher can help them. So as I say, I elicit a lot of this information from the students and put it on the board, and then they can reflect and fill it in with the things that were new and interesting or challenging for them. There is a box for teacher comments. You don't have to write a comment. You can also have a box for students to write a comment to the teacher. They don't have to write a comment to the teacher. A learning diary, there isn't time for you to be commenting on everything. It's not a report. It's not an end of semester or end of year report. It's providing an opportunity for students to communicate with the teacher if they need to. And sometimes you might feel with a particular student you want to write a comment. Maybe there's something that you've noticed they've done particularly well, or maybe they need a little push and a nudge in the right direction. So I do collect them. I do usually put a tick so the students know I've looked at it and I hand them back. But I only write a comment if I feel there's something that really needs to be said. When the students are filling it in, I usually go around and I can also speak to them at that stage during the lesson. So don't think about, oh gosh, I've got learning diaries, I've got to write loads of comments, I've got to spend hours on it. That's not the point. I spend probably 10-15 minutes in class once a month. And probably about the same amount of time when I collect them in, just having a quick look through, making notes of anything like that the students are requesting or that they found very difficult. Okay, just having a look at the chat box. These are not from a book actually. These are, I create them every month and I sort of adapt them and take a screenshot, and you can use this template. Again, you can adapt what you want your students to focus on. Yeah, and great. I mean, you can do it every couple of weeks as well. You don't have to print a handout. You can write the prompts on the board and students can copy them into their notebooks. So you can do a zero photocopying version as well. So lots of flexibility there. And again, I would say don't burden yourself. Assessment for learning isn't there to kill the teacher because you've got millions of strategies. It's there to help you to choose what works well for you and find what works for your students. Now, as I said on the previous slide, it's also about successes and goals. So I've got a couple of other ideas as well. I combine my learning diary with can-do statements or can-do stickers. I do these a little bit more frequently than once a month. I do them when I feel that the students, if they've done a significant amount of work and it's time for them to reflect on something that they've done. I print can-do statements onto sticky paper because then there's something quite tactile about peeling them off and sticking them either in their notebook or in their course book. So I usually print blank ones like this on sticky paper. And again, the students can write down something that was significant for them. So they will all be writing down different things. They might be grammar related, it might be vocabulary, it might be to do with writing or speaking. Some examples, so I can describe my bedroom. And the students, again, they can put in the box how well they think they can do it. So it might be that they feel like they've made progress, but they can still make more progress. So then they might do a slightly less smiley emoji or a question mark. Here's an example for a writing task. I can write a for and against essay. I can ask and answer questions using the present perfect, so it might be grammar related as well. So can-do statements are great if you can personalize them and get students to write them yourself. You also will find them in course books. So one of the books I use is Go Getter from Pearson, and each lesson comes with each lesson starts with a can-do statement. So that's quite nice. It's ready to go. You can, of course, use the Global Scale of English or the CEFR, which also have can-do statements. And yeah, course books often have an I can and I can't section, which is useful. So again, it's up to you how you want to use can-do statements, but I would recommend using them every couple of lessons. And if you want to do it like me, I get them to stick them in their learning diary. So we have a page as well dedicated to can-do statements. And yes, I agree. Yeah, so Mohammed mentions that course books usually have unit objectives, so you can base can-do statements on those. And Alberta, you're right. So great for students' confidence. I think it's great when students realise that they're learning something and identifying it themselves is great as well. I also have two additional pages in my students' learning diaries. So one is things that help me, and the other is my goals. And of course, we have to help our students. We have to point things out sometimes. So I often, if I notice a student responded particularly well to a task, I'll suggest they put it in their learning diary. So some examples of things that help me is remembering to check irregular verbs in my verb table. Students in my class, they usually copy from the person, or they help, they borrow from the person sitting next to them, or they ask me if they can't remember an irregular verb. But actually, it's much more useful to just check the verb table. Everyone's got one in their course book. So that's a useful strategy, and the teacher isn't there when students are doing homework. Another strategy might be drawing a picture next to new words. Some students respond very well. Other students remember better when they write a translation or when they use the word in a sentence. So students can make a note of the things that help them. And in terms of goals, it's quite tricky. Teenagers, primary learners, they don't always have personal goals. They often learn English because they're at school, they have to, or because their parents have said you have to go to English lessons after school. But we can suggest goals for them. For example, watching and understanding a film in English is quite a motivating goal. Learning the words to favourite songs. So it's useful as well to have a place in the learning diary where students can make a note of their goals. And then the learning diaries, I find, makes a very nice document that you can look back on. By the end of the year, it's quite a nice souvenir because students can look at all the things they learn in terms of grammar and vocabulary and the topics they studied, but they can also focus on the things like their achievements. Sometimes I put down in the boxes things like, the funniest moment from this month. So they can also look back on some of the highlights from the year. Watching Netflix is a nice goal. I think all of our students can watch Netflix in English. Nice one there, Lester. Okay. Yes, so have a go with learning diaries. Don't have to do everything all the time. See what fits in with your syllabus, see what works with your students. If you've got bigger classes, you might want to do it less often. See what works, but experiment. Something that often goes hand in hand with learning diaries is portfolios. A portfolio is basically a folder where students can collect and store the work they are most proud of. And it should be the students who are choosing, but again, sometimes as teachers, we need to make suggestions and prompt them in the right direction. So students select the work they're proud of, they put it in their folder. It doesn't have to be a fancy folder, it can be an A3 piece of paper folded in half, it can be one of those plastic sleeves. And students can add work to it throughout the year. They can take work out as well if they think, I thought this was good when I did it, but I've done something much better now, so I'm going to replace this. So it should come from the students. So there needs to be a little bit of time allocated in lessons for updating them. And it's useful if the students have access to them during lessons. So if they can be stored somewhere in the classroom, then that's great. If not, it might be that you have to keep them in the staff room and bring them to lessons. But a good idea to allocate maybe once a month a little bit of time to updating portfolios. Portfolios are really useful for highlighting progress. So at the start of the year, students might select a piece of writing that they are really proud of. It goes in the portfolio. When it comes to the next time you're doing writing, you can refer back to the original or the first piece of writing and ask students to look back and see what they did well so they can replicate it, and also to see what feedback they got or what development areas there were so they can avoid making the same mistakes. It's not only written work that goes in a portfolio, so it can also be project work. It could be a test or an exam paper that they did particularly well on, a voice recording, or worksheets that you've done, classwork or homework as well. A couple of people I can see are using portfolios for writing. So yeah, it does work very well for writing. If we don't have a portfolio, I find that my students do writing and then it disappears. You never see it again, especially if it's been done on a scrap of paper, which often happens. So the portfolio is a great way to keep track of it so that students can look back. Alberto mentions a digital format. Do you have a good website that you can share with us, Alberto? I've only ever done paper versions of the portfolio, but I know there are some good online platforms. If you know any good online platforms, can you share them in the chat box so the other participants can try them out? So again, a nice selection of documents at the end of the year as well for students to take away the best examples of their work. For larger classes as well, it works because it's very much up to the students. So again, we're just supporting them. We don't have to be giving feedback on everything that they decide. It's up to them. A blog as well. So yeah, if your students are writing blog posts or if you're making a class blog, then that could also be a collection of work that you put together. So yeah, Maria, it's good to hear that the portfolios are helping the students to reflect. If they have a collection of work, then that's something concrete for them to reflect on. Maria, try logging out and logging back in again. I hope that will solve your sound problems. I'll speak a bit louder as well in case it's at my end. Okay. You might decide you don't have time for learning diaries or portfolios, or you might decide you'll start at the start of the next school year. So in the meantime, some shorter activities or more flexible options is to build some self-reflection and self-reflection into every lesson or every week. And to do that, you might provide students with sentence stems, such as these. I wouldn't recommend giving all of these in one go. I would give one or two for students to reflect on at the end of a lesson. So maybe I enjoyed and I'd like to practice. So something positive and then something thinking to the future that they can improve or do better. Reflective questions are also a great way to finish up a lesson. And again, one question is probably enough. If you've got a 60-minute lesson, then one reflective question, maybe two is fine. But again, asking students to reflect on the most important things they learned or things that they might do differently. So we can round off each lesson with reflection. Another nice technique is exit tickets. We talked about that in webinar 3. So if you're not sure what exit tickets are, watch webinar 3. And there's a nice little trick there for finishing off the lessons. So a slightly lower prep version than diaries or portfolios. So if at the moment you feel you haven't got time to implement those strategies, then have a go with just some regular self-reflection. Now, if we want our students to be more independent, then we need to give them choices. And one excellent way to do this is to use a choice board. A choice board is basically a list of different tasks for students to complete. And there are a couple of different options of how you want to do this. So the first option is you have a number of tasks which students have to complete. They have to complete all of them, but they can choose the order in which they do it. So here is a choice board from a recent lesson I was teaching. In the previous lesson, I taught grammar and vocabulary, and this lesson was more consolidation. So it wasn't a lesson where I was teaching something new, it was practicing it. And I wanted the students to read a text and answer questions. They needed to check their homework. And I like to get students to do that themselves using an answer key. Again, we talked about using answer keys in the previous webinar, the fourth webinar in this series. So you can watch that one for some tips on answer keys. And then you just practice writing questions and finish off a couple of tasks in the workbook. And students could choose which order they wanted to do them. They had to do them all, but they could choose. They could decide to start with the easiest task to ease themselves into the lesson, or they could start with the hardest task to get that out of the way. It was up to them. So giving them choice, giving them autonomy and independence in the classroom. Another option is to give them a selection of tasks, and they need to choose a specific number. So for this lesson, I wanted students to practice vocabulary. So there were 3 options for practicing the vocabulary. They choose one, and reading, 3 options for the reading. So we're appealing to different learner preferences. We can differentiate a little bit, so we can have slightly more challenging tasks and slightly less challenging tasks. So here for the vocabulary, they could make flashcards. They could make a word search, or they could write a sentence for each word. And then for the reading, the first task was just simply the task in the book. Another option was to read the text and draw pictures. So again, they had to read the text closely to illustrate it well, or write true and false questions. Again, the third task there is a little bit more challenging. Now the students can make their own choices, but we can be there to advise them. So if you've got a stronger student, then you want to maybe, if they're choosing the easiest tasks all the time, you might want to suggest a different task to them. As well, if you've got a student who struggles or finds things a bit more challenging, you might make a suggestion for a task that suits their learner preference and their learner style. Another option, this is the third option, this works well for projects, where you have a whole list of different projects and students just choose one that they need to carry out. And you don't need to provide as many choices as I've got on the screen here. 2 or 3 choices is enough, so you don't have to spend hours coming up with loads of tasks. Just go with what is obvious. So, you know, it might be choosing 2 tasks from 4, or it might be choosing 1 task from 3. That's enough. And again, students, when you first start giving them choices, they don't necessarily make good choices. What often happens is one student chooses a task, and then all their friends copy them and decide to do the same task. And then when they start doing the task, they realize, oh, actually, I don't think I've made a very good choice. So we can help them, we can let them change their minds. And the more often we give them choices, and the more often they make bad choices and realize it was a bad choice, then they get better at making choices. And they realize, okay, my friend's really creative and good at drawing, so my friend always chooses the creative task. That doesn't suit me. I'm much better at presentation, so I'm much better at writing. So students get better at making choices which are good for them, not just making the same choice as their partner, which we all know that happens very much in the young learner classroom. So as I say, don't spend hours coming up with loads of choices. Just come up with choices that you're happy for the students to do. They should be equal in terms of how much effort the students need to put in. And again, you can use them for adults as well, Mohammed, you're right. So it's not only a young learner technique, we can use it with adults as well. And there are other ways that we can give choices in the classroom as well. So we can give choices for homework. Maybe we did vocabulary and grammar in a lesson, and we can give the students a choice of whether they want to have some further practice with the vocabulary or the grammar. So they can choose from the workbook from a selection of activities. That's one really nice way to give choices. They can also have choices about how to record vocabulary. So it might be drawing a mind map, it might be through pictures. We can give them choices about the format in which they complete tasks. So whether they do a written task or give a presentation, whether they do a task with a pen and paper, or maybe a voice recording with their mobile phones, or maybe using tablets if you've got access to technology. We can give choices about how they want to work, either with a partner, or with a group. So there are plenty of opportunities to give choices, and the more we give choices, the better our students get at making choices, the more used to it and the more independent they get. So yeah, Vlasta, great to give choices with homework. That's a really good one, especially if you're using answer keys. So it doesn't matter if students have done different tasks, they can do different tasks and have answer keys. Yeah, ICE is a nice idea as well. So using phones is really nice, and using that as a basis for speaking and sharing ideas in the classroom is very nice. Okay, I just want to share a couple of techniques or ideas with you that are maybe not strictly assessment for learning, but are great for encouraging independence and autonomy. So I think we do a lot of this anyway, but the more we can personalize lessons and personalize learning, the more motivating it is. Everybody likes talking about themselves. We all enjoy it. It's the same for our students. So as much as possible, we need to bring the lessons back to the students. So whenever we read something or listen to something, bring it back to the students. What about your experience? How would you feel? Has this happened to you? So personalization is very great for independent learning. I think that dictionaries sometimes get a little bit overlooked, especially now that we have so many online tools, online translators. Sorry. I think that using online translators can be great. It can be a very fast way to solve a problem, but it can also bring a whole load of extra problems into the classroom. Often you get a very strange translation, and there can often be inaccuracies. So if students are doing too much translation, then there can be problems. A couple of people saying they can't hear me. I hope it's not. I hope that most of you can hear me. If you're having problems with sound, I'd recommend logging out and logging back in again. So one thing we can do is work with them using translators, but I like to work with my students with dictionaries. And again, dictionaries, students don't always know how to use them. What often happens is they look up a word, they read the first definition that they come to, they accept that as the meaning, and then what they're saying doesn't make, or what they're trying to work out doesn't make any sense. Because often we have to look at all the definitions and find the word that suits the context that we are looking for. So we need to help students realize that they need to think about the context and find the definition that matches that context. Again, there are all sorts of other bits of information in the dictionary that help students. So they need to know how to use how to work out the pronunciation from the phonemic script, the part of speech, how to use the different example sentences there. So I think it's really important to dedicate some lesson time to using dictionaries and dictionary skills. As Laura says, you're still learning how to use a dictionary. Exactly. It's not so obvious to children, I think, using an English dictionary. And I think if we want to avoid these problems where students just accept the first definition they come to, there's a problem. In Google, there's also context centers. So as well, drawing students' attention to these sorts of things are really useful. If they know how to use a dictionary well, then it's much easier for them to self-study. Okay, so quite a lot of people doing that already, which is great. As well as teaching students how to use a dictionary, then I think it's worth spending time in lessons teaching students how to use the internet responsibly and safely. Students are very good at using YouTube to learn things. There's plenty of YouTube tutorials. But what about other websites? So helping students to be able to critically evaluate websites, identify if sources are reliable or if they're unreliable sources, avoiding falling into the trap of fake news, and just basically being safe online. It's great that we can use more and more technology in the classroom, but if we are asking students to research and use their phones and do things online, then we need to make sure that they're doing it safely. So I definitely recommend some lessons on using the internet responsibly, finding and evaluating websites, and staying safe online. My students, when they get stuck, the first thing they do is ask the person sitting next to them, then they ask the teacher. And if we want students to be independent, we need more options than that, because there's not always someone sitting next to them and the teacher's not always there to help them. So one thing you can create with your students is a stuck board, or it's basically a poster. So this is something I do with my students usually early on in the semester. but we make a poster of things that students can do when they get stuck. So we brainstorm, and then I print everything up as a checklist or a poster. And so some examples might be asking your partner, simply stopping and thinking about it. Students often, they don't think, they immediately ask for help. If they don't know something, they either give up or ask for help. So getting students to brainstorm and make a checklist of things that can help them when they're stuck is quite a nice thing to do, that reminds them of all the different strategies they can do. And even just having a go. I think sometimes students think, well, I don't know what to do, so I'm not even going to try. I'll just wait until the teacher goes through the answers. But actually, it's much better if they have a go. And if they practice having a go in the classroom, they're much more likely to have a go when their homework is difficult. So yeah, really simple things, but not always obvious to young learners. So I would say worth sharing, worth doing. And of course, another thing that is great for independence is asking the students what else they know. So after you've finished your lesson, or you've got to the end of the topic and you've introduced all the information you wanted to, the grammar and vocabulary, give the students an opportunity to share what they know. As I said, everybody likes talking about themselves. Everybody likes feeling like they know something, sharing their expertise, feeling like the teacher. So a really simple routine at the end of lessons is simply to ask students, what else do you know? What can you tell me now that's related to the topic, related to the lesson? Share your ideas. Nice for building confidence, building self-esteem, and just recognizing that the students are coming to the class with all their own ideas and knowledge as well. So on that note, I would like to ask you, what else do you know about independent learning that we haven't talked about in this webinar? So any other ideas for encouraging independent learning in your classrooms? What do you do? The flipped classroom, yeah, it's nice to see that mentioned. If you don't know about the flipped classroom, then do a bit of research. But basically, it's when the students do a lot of the groundwork at home, so they might be doing the gap fills, the practice activities at home, so that in lessons, there's more time to be dedicated to projects, to speaking, and to using new language. Ari, I'm glad that you like it. Try it out. Great that you use dictionaries, Elizabeth, and it's really nice if you work for a school that's got class sets of dictionaries. Getting students to talk about their hobbies is a really nice one. They can be like an expert, I guess, so they can explain and talk about their hobby to their classmates. Venn diagrams are lovely. Elena, graded readers, great. I think that encouraging students to read graded readers is brilliant. And if you've got a library with graded readers, then that's wonderful. And if you work for a school that doesn't have graded readers, then I'd recommend asking if they can invest in some. I used to avoid them because I used to think that everyone had to be reading the same graded reader at the same time, but I realized that wasn't true. We can just give students graded readers so that they can choose. Well, they should definitely be choosing which graded readers, like when we read books for pleasure, they should choose. And yeah, recording the books that they read is also very nice. That's a nice record as well. They can look back on how many books they've read. Okay, Victoria, that's a very nice idea. So Victoria's saying she's got a yellow card when it's on the board. Students can't ask questions, they have to keep thinking and trying. That's really nice. And I guess then you take the yellow card down, and if they still have problems, that's when they can ask questions. But that's very nice. So having designated times when students can ask questions and designated times when they should try and work for themselves is really nice, as long as they know that the teacher will help them at some point. I like that idea, Victoria. I will try it out. Using Google Translate and then fixing the problems. That's brilliant. So that's highlighting to students that this is a really useful tool. It's really helpful. I use it because I travel a lot, but then highlighting the issues as well, and that it's not foolproof. So that's very nice, Mohammed. And yeah, Ola's researching and presenting is great for independence as well. Writing blogs. Yeah. Okay, lots of really nice ideas, and some ideas I'm going to be borrowing, so thank you very much for that, and I hope you try out each other's ideas. Um, okay, so those are the strategies we talked about today. I hope there's a couple that appeal to you for you to try out. You certainly don't have to do everything, but you need to see what works for you and your students. So maybe choose one or two that appeal, and see how they go in your upcoming lessons. If you have any questions for me, then let me know what they are in the chat box now. They can be from today, or they can be related to previous webinars. It's up to you. Thank you very much for the message there. I'm not sure what your name is. Rinsa? Sorry, I used to know a little bit of Russian. Thank you. Yes, I hope that they do involve your students. Yeah, thanks for that message. You can't get the slides for the webinar, but you will get a handout and you can rewatch this recording. So we'll email you the link. Victoria, good luck with the stuck board. Thank you for joining. I think you've shared, well, my ideas are creative, so are yours. So thank you for sharing your ideas. I will definitely go back through the chat box and read the things you were sharing. Marine, good luck with the portfolios. And electronically, yeah, I think that's probably a good tactic. I might have to do some research myself on online portfolios. Michael, thank you for the comment. I don't want to miss any of your great ideas, so no bother keeping an eye on the chat box. Good luck with the choice board, Sylvia, as well. Okay, take a screenshot now if you want to find the links to those previous recordings. And this is a part of the website where we're going to add some more assessment for learning resources. So there's not that much on this website yet. You can find these webinars, and we will be adding to it, so keep an eye on it. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you in particular if you joined all 5 webinars. I recognise some of the names, so I thank you for coming to all of them. If you miss some of them, you can watch them by following that link. You will get an email from us this week with the certificates of attendance, with the handout, yeah, certificate of attendance, recording, and the handout. There is nothing specifically for writing at the moment, but you could have a look at Pearson's Learn English site. I have a look through the blogs because there might be something about writing there. Okay, so thank you very much for joining, and thank you for the nice comments. It's been a real pleasure running these webinars. I'm sure I will be doing more webinars for Pearson in the future, so keep an eye. Again, you can sign up for their emailing list, so you will hear about any webinars there. And I hope that we will have some more webinars together soon. So thank you very much. Thank you so much. If you're going off to teach now, then happy teaching. I hope you have lovely lessons. If you finished for the day, then great, go and relax, get a cup of tea. And thank you very much. Okay, so bye-bye. Okay, thank you, bye-bye.